Hey, this is Derek Whatley. I'm an engineer working on OpenShift migrations at Red Hat. In this video, we'll take a look at the new on-demand rollback functionality that will be included in the Migration Toolkit for Containers 1.4 release. We created the rollback feature to give you confidence that if migration doesn't go according to plan, there's an escape hatch that's a button click away. If you notice that an app isn't running correctly after being migrated to your target cluster, Rollback lets you revert the migration and safely restore apps to their original state. We recommend that users of the Migration Toolkit for Containers get comfortable with the migration and rollback workflows on a sample app before starting to migrate important applications. So to begin here, let's create a migration plan that's going to migrate a single namespace. We'll select our source in our target cluster and the replication repository where assets will be backed up into temporarily. We'll select a namespace, discover the persistent volumes attached to that namespace, and we can see that we have two PVCs in this namespace. Here I'm choosing to use an indirect PV migration, and it looks like validation was successful on this plan. So now I'll go ahead and click the migrate button and we'll begin the migrations, being sure to allow transactions to be halted on the source cluster. In the terminal at the bottom of the screen, you can see there's a left and right pane. The left pane represents my source cluster, which is OpenShift 3.11, and the right pane is my target cluster, OpenShift 4.6, where I'm migrating the apps to. You can see that I currently have an Nginx deployment pod running on the source cluster that's being replaced with a stage pod and quiesced. So this app will be terminated as part of the migration process so that we don't have the app running in two different places at the same time to keep data consistency. We'll do a copy of the resources over to the target cluster, and in the end of the migration, the source app will be totally quiesced. And this is something that we can revert later on with the rollback if needed. We can see now on the target cluster that as the migration has succeeded, that the app that was running on the source is now running there, and let's say that something doesn't look quite how we liked, or we were just doing this migration as a test, we can now use the rollback button on the migration plan to completely revert the changes that have been made here. We're going to restore the original replica counts, delete the migrated resources that were on the target cluster, delete the Valero backups and restores, and remove migration annotations and labels. So now you can see when we click that rollback button, there's a new migration that's a rollback migration that shows up under the migration plan. And as this migration runs, as it rolls back everything that was done previously, you can see all the resources disappearing from the target cluster and then being scaled back up on the source cluster. As the rollback nears completion, we can see that we now see a rollback successful sign, and our application is back in place on the source cluster. And you can see it's been removed completely from the target. So from here, we can either try to figure out what may have gone wrong if this was an unsuccessful migration attempt, or if this was a test, then everything's back how it was, and we can plan out the actual migrations we want to do.